Hey everyone, welcome to our Making Competitive Applications session. My name's Izzy and I'm the Schools Liaison Officer at Trinity College, and this is my colleague Gaia.
Hi, my name's Gaia. I'm the Schools Liaison Officer for St John's College. In today's session, we'll be running you through the application process step by step.
So here you can see all of the stages of the application process. So we're going to talk about each of these stages in order and in some detail in this session. But just to give you a quick overview so you know what to expect, first of all, we're going to talk about choosing a course, which is really, really important, probably the most important part of the application process. Then choosing a college or submitting an open application. Then we'll talk about admissions assessments and how you check the requirements for those. Then we'll talk about your UCAS application and personal statement. Then we'll talk about the SAQ, the Supplementary Application Questionnaire, which is Cambridge specific. Then we'll talk a little bit about written work and admissions tests. Then we'll give you sort of an overview of the interview process and tips on preparation and an idea of what you can expect. And then we'll talk about the decision, how you'll hear about the decision. So first of all, we will start at the beginning and talk about choosing a course. So here on this word cloud, you can see all of the different courses that we offer at Cambridge University. So you study one TRIPOS subject out of 30 different courses. So there are 30 courses there. TRIPOS is just the word that we use to sort of refer to each different degree. So those 30 different courses can be seen in this word cloud here. Appreciate it's a little bit hard to read some of those, but we'll show you them again later. But those courses actually cover 65 different subject areas, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about the courses in a second. So when thinking about choosing a course, as I said, this is a really, really important part of the application process. It's important that you spend time thinking about what course you want to study and make sure that you choose the right course for you. So make sure you look at the course details and structure. Bear in mind that courses with the same name at different universities could be very different. So for example, a history course could be different at different universities depending on the structure, so how many lectures you have, whether you have seminars, whether you have smaller group teaching, the opportunity of doing a dissertation, how much choice you get within the course, so which different topics you study. And other courses will be quite similar. So do have a look at the course details and structure and think about how it's taught, the modules that there are on offer, how it's assessed, and try and make sure that you're choosing the right course for you. Obviously, bear in mind that some careers require a specific degree. So if you're thinking of going into a career, something like medicine, engineering, architecture, then you will require a particular degree to go into that. So hopefully you'll be aware of that. However, for everyone else, the majority of top jobs don't require a specific degree. A lot of top jobs actually just ask for a good degree. So generally that means getting a class 1 or a 2-1, so that's the grade there, from a good university. So you can go into careers in law, teaching, journalism, accounting, and many others with a variety of different degrees. They don't always ask for a particular degree. Really they're just looking for particular skills that you will have gained during your degree, regardless of the subject you studied. The most important thing is to take a subject you will enjoy. If you're going to be spending a lot of time studying something for, a large part of 3 or 4 years, maybe even more, then you want to make sure that it's something that you're going to be willing to work hard at and are going to be motivated to put the work in for. Also, just a tip to look at related courses. So particularly with the Cambridge courses, the subjects that we offer are pretty broad, but that also means that there's a fair amount of crossover between some of the courses. So do sort of have a look at related courses. An example of this, so this is kind of particularly seen in some of the art subjects. So courses like theology and philosophy have some crossover. So perhaps if you're considering one of those, have a look at the other one. Perhaps if you're studying philosophy at school, then have a look at both courses and see sort of whether one of those might suit you. And similarly with English and classics. So if you're studying English at school, even if you haven't studied any Latin or Greek at school, you can still apply for classics at Cambridge, you can apply for the 4-year course, and there is some crossover there. So it's just sort of worth being a bit open-minded there, and having a think about other courses that might not be super obvious at first. So here we've got the list of courses. So we split these sort of roughly into sciences and arts and social sciences. On the sciences side, you'll probably notice that there aren't any courses like biology, physics, chemistry. They're all encompassed into natural sciences, which also includes other sciences like earth sciences and material science and a few others as well. So essentially all of the sciences are included within one degree, natural sciences. So within that you can study physics, biology, and you can specialise in the areas that you want to. So that's sort of just something to bear in mind, that our courses are particularly broad, and natural sciences is a good example of that. But other courses will also be quite broad and will have a lot of opportunity for flexibility within them.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the arts and social sciences side of things. So it's really worth bearing in mind that the arts and social science courses at Cambridge tend to be quite literature heavy. So if you're someone who does enjoy literature but isn't quite sure what you want to do make sure you check out quite a few of the different courses, because something might stand out that you haven't previously expected. I'm just going to talk you through a few of the ones that you might not have heard of. So Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic is a subject which is quite unique to Cambridge. That's studying a lot of the language, literature and history of medieval Britain, which is quite exciting. Obviously we have stuff like archaeology and architecture, which you'll find at other universities. We also have Asian and Middle Eastern studies. Now this is our languages degree, people who are hoping to study stuff like Chinese, Japanese. Much like the languages degree, it's a 4-year degree with a year abroad embedded into it. Again, it can be quite literature and history and culture heavy, as well as just learning the language. So if you are interested in languages and are thinking of starting something like that from scratch, do have a look at that course. Classics, again, quite literature focused and quite language focused as well. So do sort of bear that in mind. You don't need to have had any experience with Latin or Greek before taking it. Obviously, we have a lot of the subjects that you might expect at other universities, so economics, education, English, geography. The history course, you can also take history and modern languages or history and politics. Those are our only joint honours degrees at Cambridge. Human, social and political sciences is sort of our politics, international relations, sociology course. It's a bit of a kind of pick and mix degree in that you can take lots of different papers from different areas of the social sciences, which can be quite nice if you've not studied any of those before, but you're really interested in lots of things to do with that. Land economy is another quite unique course to Cambridge. It's sort of a mixture of business studies, geography, law, stuff like that, economics. So if you're leaning towards any of those subjects but not quite sure what to focus on, do have a look at that. And then a lot of the rest of our courses, again, pretty standard across universities. There's quite a lot of crossover between philosophy and theology, so do look at that. And do obviously just look at all of the details of all of the courses to make sure that you really know what you're applying for. So moving on to choosing a college, there are 29 undergraduate colleges in Cambridge. You can either make an application to a specific college, or you can make an open application. If you make an open application, then your application will be pretty randomly allocated to a college. There's no necessary benefit or negative to making an open application, but if you don't really mind where you end up, then that can be a good route. So obviously all of the colleges are quite unique. Here's just a few ways that they might differ. Obviously the colleges differ in size. The smallest college is Peterhouse, whilst the largest college is Trinity. So they really vary in terms of number of students. So if you want to be in quite a sort of small, tight-knit community, maybe go for a smaller college. If you'd like a little bit more variety, go for a larger one. The location obviously varies college to college. The furthest out college is Girton, which is a few miles out of the city centre. and there's of course lots of them that are sort of slap bang in the middle of the city. The appearance is obviously a huge thing, and that's quite linked to the age of the college. So the oldest college is again Peterhouse, which was built in the 1200s, whereas the newest college was built in the 1900s. So obviously they're going to look very different in terms of the architecture. Gender, some colleges are female only colleges. Those are trans inclusive female only colleges. That's Newnham and Murray Edwards. So if you are female and you would like to be in a female only environment, obviously you can opt to apply for one of those ones. The accommodation obviously varies from college to college in a few different ways. Sometimes that's stuff like facilities, so some colleges can guarantee an ensuite for the whole duration of the degree, some can't. Some have sort of different types of rooms, some let you keep your rooms over the holidays, whereas some prefer you to move out over the holidays. If any of these sorts of things are really important to you, do your research on that. And then facilities obviously vary college to college. All colleges have libraries, but sort of the size of them does vary. Some colleges have sports facilities, more music facilities. Again, if any of these things are important to you, do your research before you make an application. Here are just a few reasons that people might pick a college. Obviously, just to say that all of these are completely valid. I wouldn't say that there's any sort of one rule on how to pick a college. Here's just a few. So some of these are based on facilities, like it has a tennis court, it has a big library, I wanted a kitchen with an oven. Some of them are based on location, like I wanted somewhere central, or it's right next to the lecture block. Some are based on size, so I come from a small school, so didn't want to go to a big college. And then some of them are just completely based on sort of the vibe of it. So maybe I went there on an open day and I liked it, or the students seem really friendly. So obviously, yeah, there is no sort of one right answer to how you choose a college, but there's just a few suggestions of what you might want to be thinking about.
Okay, so moving on to think about pre-interview assessments. So the registration deadline for most of the assessments is the 15th of October. So it's worth sort of making a note of that in your diary now. It is the same deadline as the UCAS application, which Guy will talk about in a second. But do note that the BMAT registration deadline, so that's for medicine, is the 1st of October. So you need to have registered for that a little bit earlier than for the others. So just kind of be aware of that if you are planning to apply for medicine. The assessments will be taken in early November. So the date for this year is the 4th of November for 2020. But it is usually sort of around that time if you're thinking about applying in the future. So just note that students will need to be registered by your assessment centre, and that it will usually be your school, but it's worth getting in touch with your teachers as soon as possible, definitely sort of when you're back at school in September, just to make sure everything's in place for that. And you'll have to inform them that you need to be registered for that. So do head to the website, so the address is there, to check out whether you need to have a pre-interview assessment. So not all subjects do have pre-interview assessments, but note that which subjects do have them has changed slightly in the last few years. So even if you think you know whether you do or don't, do just double check that just to be completely sure, because the most up-to-date list of which subjects require pre-interview assessments is on there. So even if you do kind of know someone in an older year who's applied, just make sure that you've got it right, because it is a compulsory part of the application if you do need to sit one. In terms of preparing for them, there's lots of information online. So the university website has got detailed pages explaining the form of each assessment, with some practice examples too. So we'd recommend that you practice some in timed conditions just to make sure you're used to the format. Some of the more mathematical subjects on the science side might require you to have some specific knowledge, so it's worth just checking out what you need to know, just to check if you need to revise anything that you've learned in the past in school. But you shouldn't have to sort of learn anything new for any of them, so you shouldn't need lots of extra knowledge. But definitely do just check on the website, because all the information you need is on there.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the personal statement. So the deadline for the personal statement is alongside the UCAS application, which is the 15th of October. The personal statement needs to be about 4,000 characters, including blank spaces, or 47 lines, including blank lines. So that's about 500 to 600 words. It should firstly tell us why you want to study the subject, and then secondly, tell us why you would be good at studying the subject. More specifically, you should be telling us about your academic ability and potential, your motivation, your suitability for the chosen course, and your commitment and self-discipline. So we use the personal statements to confirm the appropriateness of the chosen subject and course, to confirm your commitment and organisation, provide a starting point for discussions during the interview, and to find out about your interest in the subject, the way you've explored your subject more widely, any work experience you might have, and just a few of your extracurricular activities or positions of responsibility. So when we say stuff like commitment, we mean that, for instance, if you're wanting to study medicine, we would expect the commitment to sort of be wanting to be a doctor. We wouldn't expect you to be saying, oh, I chose medicine because I want to be at university for 6 years. So one of the main things that your personal statement should be doing is demonstrating your interest in the subject, which is why we've also added to this the way you've explored your subject more widely. There's lots of different ways to explore your subjects, and we call this supercurricular activity. So there will be another session on that if you'd like to watch that, going into a little bit more detail. But just as a starting point, here are a few things that you might want to check out just for doing supercurricular exploration. So obviously a few of these are magazines. So you've got Nature magazine there, The Economist, New Scientist, History Today. Almost all academic disciplines will have sort of journals or magazines that are linked to them. And a lot of those will have the opportunity to sample a few articles for free, even if the main ones are paid for. So do check those out if you're sort of just interested in exploring your subject a bit further. Some of the things on here are podcasts or radio shows, stuff like In Our Time with Melvin Bragg, which gives some really interesting sort of starter information about specifics to do with certain topics. There's obviously a few other places that you can find stuff like that, so BBC iPlayer, BBC Radio 4. We also put on here TED Talks. TED Talks are a really great place to start if you're wanting to explore a subject but have no idea where you want to start off. That's particularly relevant for those kind of subjects that you haven't actually studied at school, but you're looking into at university. The other thing that we've got on here is the Very Short Introduction series. The Very Short Introduction series is a really excellent series of books that sort of has an introduction on almost anything that you could imagine, whether that's sort of a very specific element of your subject or whether that's the subject in general. These can be really great places to start because they're quite academic in nature, but very much aimed at someone who doesn't know anything about the subject. They'll also have a really good bibliography at the end of the book if you want to continue with some quite academic research. So if you're really not sure how to explore your subject, these would be really good places to start. Sometimes your school will have had them in the library, or you might be able to get them quite cheaply online. Just to add to that, a lot of the resources on the previous slide were also free. You don't need to be spending lots of money on exploring your subject. Do make the most of the internet and all of the resources that are sort of readily available to you through that. So a bit more about personal statements. It should be giving specific evidence and examples of areas of interest and achievement. So you don't want to be sort of really generally saying, oh, I love this subject, I just think it's really great. You want to be saying, I love this to do with the subject because of this reason. It should also show that you've researched the course carefully. So you don't want to be talking about, say, modules that aren't going to feature in the university course, which is one of the reasons that it is really important to research the course. About 2/3 of the text should be subject-based, so an opening paragraph explaining why the course was chosen, 2 or 3 paragraphs detailing how interests in the subject have been developed outside school, so reading, work experience, attending talks, hobbies, etc., or any of those things on the previous slide. And then a short closing paragraph, maybe mentioning a few extracurricular interests or career aspirations. So we've just put up a paragraph from a personal statement on here. I'm just going to give you a few seconds to read that through. So just to talk you through a few of the pros and cons of this personal statement, I've put one line in bold there, which is researching many aspects of marine life, from the dynamic life cycle of a jellyfish to the blind gradual evolution of a whale. That bit's really interesting because it's a very specific example of something to do with the subject. So it's definitely a pro to have mentioned that kind of specific example. To further that, they could have talked about the actual resources that they researched from, and how they went further from that. Obviously, there's quite a lot of detail later on. However, there's a lot of really broad, general, sweeping statements, stuff like biology is ubiquitous. You really don't need to be saying stuff like this. The people who are interviewing you and who are reading your personal statements are biologists themselves, if it's for biology. So any kind of broad, sweeping statement is probably either something that they've heard before or something that they know. They know that biology is important, otherwise they wouldn't have dedicated their life to studying it. Just to also mention this beginning bit, a lot of personal statements do start off by saying, oh, I was really interested in this subject from a thing that happened when I was younger. Obviously, if that is true, if you had some huge defining life event when you were a child and decided, yeah, this is it, this is what I want to do, then absolutely fine. But having said that, I don't think a lot of people will actually have been sort of 4 years old, stood in a rock pool deciding, yeah, absolutely, this is what I want to do. So don't sort of go for that cliche just because you think that you should be doing that. I think it's also fair to say that this personal statement is very wordy without actually saying a lot of detail. So do sort of be aware of the fact that you do have a word count, and be careful about sort of just using lots of words without really saying anything. We've got another personal statement here, so I'm just going to give you a minute to read that. So just a few pros and cons of this. Obviously a pro, it does seem genuinely passionate, and it mentions a really interesting idea of bias. So this person is not just saying, oh, I'm interested in history, it's talking about a specific element that they're interested in. Having said that, it is really too general and too vague. There's no real sense of exploring a subject. Again, it doesn't mention any kind of resources. It has some poor grammar, and it also has a bit too much repetition as well. Again, be really aware of that word count. Just to give you an example of how you might improve on that personal statement, getting rid of some of the repetition. You don't want to be using the word fascinating twice in 2 lines. Making sure that you proofread and change any grammar issues. Do get other people to have a quick skim through of your personal statement as well if you're worried about that kind of thing. Giving more examples of the way that you've actually explored your subject. So after this idea of people's perceptions and biases, I've put a quick line in there about researching several different sources and comparing the approach taken by each of them. I've particularly enjoyed so-and-so's approach. To take this even further, they could have been a lot more specific about the examples that they're researching, and they could have given a lot more detail about what exactly they thought about that particular source. I've also just got rid of that line about learning more about it. Your personal statement shouldn't sort of very generally say, oh, I want to learn more about this subject. That's sort of implied by the fact you're applying to study it. So maybe mention something in particular that you're really excited to study. So final tips on personal statement: show, don't tell. It's all about demonstrating your interest, not just saying the words I am interested in. Discuss, don't list. So it shouldn't be just a reading list. You shouldn't just have a list of all of the books that you've read and not given any more detail about it. In general, you should be saying more about less. So be specific, but talk quite a lot about the specifics. So mention a resource and then say what you learn, what you thought about it, and whether there's any links between resources that you've read. Do keep the extracurricular information brief and relevant. So that's the sort of stuff that you're doing outside of classes that's not necessarily furthering your interest in a subject. And make sure you read it out to yourself and others, just to make sure that it sort of does sound really genuine and that it all makes sense.
Okay, so then moving on to the supplementary application questionnaire. So this is Cambridge specific, so it's something that just Cambridge asks for. It's a form that you complete online, and it's used to collect information that isn't part of the UCAS application. So some of the things it's sort of used to collect are things like topics covered in A-level, class sizes. There's also the option for a Cambridge specific personal statement, so it's not compulsory to fill that in, and it won't affect your application if you don't fill that in, but it can be a really good opportunity if the course you're applying to at Cambridge is quite different from courses you're applying to elsewhere. So an example of that is, for example, when I was applying to university, I was applying to physics at my other universities, and I was applying to natural sciences at Cambridge. So as part of the natural sciences course, I would also be studying some chemistry, and I'd also have a go at material science as well. So I use that kind of short amount of space just to talk about why I wanted to continue studying chemistry and get the opportunity to learn about material science. So that's the kind of example of when it could be really good to fill that in. So if you're in a situation like that, then it might be really useful for you to fill it in, but don't just repeat information that's already in your personal statement, because we'll have access to your personal statement as well, so there's no need to sort of duplicate information. But if you want to fill it in, it's there. So you complete the SAQ online in multiple sessions. You can sort of go back and fill it in later if you want to. You should get the link to it as soon as you submit your UCAS application, or shortly after you submit your UCAS application. And the deadline for that is the 22nd of October. So that's 1 week after the UCAS application deadline. Do be really careful about the deadline. Like the UCAS application deadline, it's a hard deadline, and we can't consider applications that are that come in after that. So do make sure you get it in like a little bit early if possible. And if you'd like to get more information on that, then just head to the website and look for the section on the SAQ, because you can see in detail which questions you'll be asked. It might be useful to make sure you've got some of that information to hand before you actually have to fill it in, just to make sure you don't have any problems while you're filling it in for real.
So just to go over this, this is written work and at-interview assessments. You might be asked to have an at-interview assessment, or you might be asked to submit written work in between your application and your interview, or possibly both. And for the at-interview written assessments, there is no need to register in advance. You'll be automatically registered for them. They're taken when you're in Cambridge for an interview, if you're interviewed. So usually on the same day or the day before if you're staying overnight for your interview. Other than that, most of the information is the same for pre-interview assessments. All of the information is on the website, including stuff like specimen papers and past papers, if you'd like to look at those to prepare. You might be asked to submit written work for quite a few arts subjects. So that will usually be 1 or 2 essays that you've written for your A-levels. That's usually something that you've prepared already for school. You're not asked to prepare it specifically for Cambridge. So for instance, a lot of people might submit coursework that they've done, or just an essay that they've written for their teacher or for class.
So then moving on to the interview. So interviews are often what prospective applicants get stressed about. So we'll, over the next few slides, we'll talk about why we interview, the interview process, and sort of some practical tips on how you can prepare, and hopefully that will help ease any worries or concerns you might have. So first of all, why interview? So why do we actually interview in Cambridge? So many of our applicants are predicted high grades. So generally A star AA for arts, or A star A for sciences. So those are the grade requirements for our degree courses sort of broadly. So most of our applicants will be predicted either those grades or higher. Applicants will generally have pretty strong references from their school and good personal statements following some of the advice that Guy gave earlier in the session. So interviews allow us to go beyond the paperwork and assess a few different things. So some of the things that we're looking at are we're sort of checking that you're well suited to the course that you've chosen. We want you to do really well on the course if you come to Cambridge, sort of checking that suitability for the course there. We want to check that you've got the potential to study it at the highest level. So again, we want you to be able to do really well and flourish within the course. So we're checking that you have that potential. And one thing that we're also checking is that you would benefit from the supervision system. So one of the main ways that we teach in Cambridge is with supervision, so small group teaching sessions where you'll have a small group of students, usually 2 or 3 students, with an academic. Now, I appreciate that an interview isn't sort of an exact replica of that, given that you'll be on your own in the interview and you'll likely have around 2 academics in the interview. So it's not sort of an exact copy there, but they're trying to sort of recreate that environment where you're having a high-level academic discussion, where you're discussing different ideas, you're working through problems, and to see how you cope with that environment. So I think that sometimes helps people feel less intimidated by the interview. Given that supervisions are sort of the norm for Cambridge students, students will generally have between 1 and 4 supervisions a week during term time. So that's sort of a regular occurrence, and students will get used to them very quickly. So if you just sort of see the interview as a slightly more formal version of a supervision, then that might sort of help ease your worries a little bit, given that we're just sort of trying to check that that's something that you can thrive in, sort of a type of learning that will work well for you. So then moving on to the interview process. So the majority of applicants in general are called for interview for most subjects. The interviews usually take place in the first 3 weeks of December. So I would just sort of warn you not to make lots of unbreakable commitments during that time, because once if you're invited to interview, once you're given an interview slot, it can be quite difficult to rearrange. Interviews are organised by the college, so either the college that you apply to or the college that you are allocated to if you submit an open application. Usually interviews will take place in the colleges in Cambridge, but do keep an eye on the university website for the latest information to see if there are any changes to this year's admissions round. Applicants will usually have 2 to 3 interviews, and interviews will generally last between about 20 and 30 minutes. The interviews will be conducted by academics. As I said, it's usually 2 academics in the room, but it can be more. And the questions will be predominantly academic and subject focused. So definitely don't be surprised if the conversation is sort of entirely focused on the subject or course you're applying for, and is sort of academic throughout. So what can you expect during your interview? So interviews are likely to involve discussions on a few different things. So these are the sort of main topics that usually can come up in interviews. So your recent academic work. So you might be asked about recent academic work you've done, whether that's something that you've submitted to the college, whether that's just something you've been doing at school, something you've mentioned on your personal statement. So just be prepared to talk about recent academic work that you've been doing. You may be asked about wider reading and or work experience. Work experience, that'll be particularly if it's sort of really relevant for the course. So courses such as medicine and veterinary medicine, work experience is strongly encouraged if you are able to get some. Again, do check out the websites for those just to see sort of the latest updates on work experience and the requirements. But if you have done work experience that's related to your subject, then you may be asked about that, or perhaps about wider reading that you've mentioned in your personal statement. You could be asked about visible issues related to the subject in the wider world. So this could be particularly sort of relevant for subjects like politics or economics, where there could be sort of quite big news stories surrounding that subject. So sort of just be prepared in case you do get asked that. New scenarios in which to apply existing knowledge. So this is definitely something that you should expect in your interview. So this is a really good way to sort of level the playing field, and it means that regardless of your knowledge, everyone is sort of really in the same situation when they get presented with a new scenario. So what you might be asked to do is you'll be given sort of a new scenario, a new situation, a new problem, something you won't have come across at school, and be asked to apply existing knowledge or skills you've got from your studies at school to that problem and see how far you can sort of get with it. You may not be required to come up with sort of the correct answer. There may be different correct answers or different ways of approaching it. But they're really just trying to see how you think and how you learn, and sort of how you deal with something that is new that you haven't just been told in school. You may also have to deal with written material, so it could be something that you're given before the interview, like a text that you have a chance to annotate, or you might be given, say, some data or graphs or a scientific problem within the interview that you then have to discuss. So sometimes you might also be asked to come to a general interview. So some colleges do require general interviews, in addition to 1 or 2 subject interviews, but they are often still academic, but it's sort of a chance to get to know you. If you do have one, it's a good opportunity to get used to the interview format before you actually have the academic interviews. So don't be surprised if you do get asked for a general interview. So next, some top tips. So when you're in the interview, try and explain your thinking, but don't feel like you have to constantly talk. So it's okay to take a few seconds to sort of just sort out your thoughts, or just repeat the question in your head or something. But there's no point just sitting in silence for a long time, or just blurting out whatever you're thinking. If you can sort of explain what you're thinking, put your thoughts into some sort of reasonable dialogue, then that will help the interviewer know what it is you're thinking. They'll be able to see if you're on the right lines or if you're really not on the right lines. And that will mean that they can either push you in the right direction or sort of perhaps rephrase the question if you've misunderstood it. So sort of going on that, don't assume that prompting means things are going badly. Interviewers might prompt if they think you're if they think you are on the right track but are perhaps not super confident. If you have misunderstood the question, they might sort of prompt you again. Prompting can mean like lots of different things, and it definitely doesn't mean that your interview is going badly. So try not to sort of overthink what does or doesn't happen in the interview too much. In terms of like practical arrangements, give yourself plenty of time to sort of be there. Make sure you wear something comfortable. There's no need to wear anything really smart if you don't want to. Some people like to wear sort of a suit or a smart outfit, and that's totally fine. But it's best just to wear something that you feel comfortable in, and that makes you feel confident. So there's sort of no need to wear something smart if you don't want to. Don't be afraid in the interview to stop and think, but also ask questions. So if you are struggling to understand the question, or you feel you've misheard something, or perhaps if you feel like you don't have all the information, then feel free to ask them questions. So if you're not sure about something, you can ask for clarification as well. So it is fine to say that you just need a few seconds to think about something. Bear in mind that any sort of pause will probably feel longer to you than it actually is. So if you do sort of feel like your thoughts are all jumbled and you can't like string a sentence together, just take a second, stop, breathe, it's okay. And hopefully after a short pause, you'll be able to give a much more reasoned response if you've got your thoughts straight rather than diving straight in. So sort of in terms of pausing, it's okay to take sort of short pauses, but if you're really not sure, it's better to start explaining your thinking rather than just sit in silence for minutes and minutes at a time. So that can be sort of a difficult balance to strike, but just sort of be aware that it is okay to pause, it's okay to ask questions, but also it's okay if you're not sure. You can tell the interviewer that you're perhaps deciding between two different ideas and you're not sure which to go with. Just explain why you think that, and then they'll be able to help you. So then thinking about how to prepare. So academically, read beyond the bounds of your school curriculum. So as Guy was saying earlier with supercurricular activities, all that sort of supercurricular exploration sort of counts as reading beyond the bounds of your school curriculum. So try and stretch yourself to learn about things that aren't in your school curriculum. Try and develop your own opinions and interpretation. So if you read something, watch something, listen to something, challenge yourself, challenge the viewpoint that is presented there. Think about whether you agree. If you do, why? If you don't, why don't you? Try talking with family, friends, teachers, pets, in a mirror if you need to, about your subject. Just sort of having speaking out loud about your subject can really help you sort of gain confidence. You might be surprised at how little you actually speak about your subject out loud, so try and push yourself to make sure you're having those conversations so that it doesn't feel as strange when you're in the interview and have to speak about your subject for 30 minutes. If you are speaking with someone, get them to ask you questions. It doesn't matter if they know anything about the subject or not. Get them to ask you questions and quiz you. That will sort of help make sure that you really understand something, and hopefully it will help with your schoolwork as well. Shortly before the interview, you may want to look back over your personal statement. It may form part of the interview, so it's just a good idea to make sure that you are prepared and sort of ready to talk about anything that you've put on your personal statement. In terms of sort of mentally, physically, don't stay up too late trying to cram. They're not testing that you know all of the stuff that you're going to learn at university. So you don't need to sort of learn lots of new things just for the interview. And it's much better to sort of have, to be fresher and not super groggy and tired. I know I can't think when I'm too tired. So make sure you get a good night's sleep. Make sure you're well rested, hydrated, comfortable. Those are sort of some practical things that will hopefully help you feel a little bit more confident going into the interview. So finally, we've got a few questions here just to show you sort of a range of types of interview questions. So we're not saying this is what you will be asked, but we're just showing you that interviews can be quite different. So for all of these questions, there isn't necessarily like a particular right answer. What we mean by that is there are sort of lots of different answers you could give. Some of them might be more technically correct than others, but these sorts of questions could perhaps be interpreted in different ways. So you've got some sort of quite big, broad questions like who writes history, what is politics? Those are obviously questions where you could sort of have a debate about it. You could come up with quite a reasoned argument. Then you've got a question like, tell me about this cactus, which could result in quite a technical discussion about the cactus itself. But again, you could hone in on different aspects of the cactus. You could think about where they grow, what they look like, why they are the way they are. There's sort of different ways you could approach that question. And then finally, you've got a question like, you will have come across X, Y, Z at school. Can you apply it to this new situation? So that could appear in lots of different interviews. Essentially, it's just showing you came across this at school. How would you go about applying it to this new situation? there might not be an answer that you need to get to. Even if there is a correct answer, as there sometimes is in science, then don't worry about it if you don't feel like you've got to the correct answer. A lot of the interview assessment is about assessing sort of how you approach the question and sort of how you get to an answer. So it's not necessarily all about just getting to a correct answer. A lot of it is about your journey and the learning as well.
So just to talk a little bit about the application outcome, you should find out about the outcome of your application around mid-January after you have interviewed. There are sort of 3 things that might happen. So firstly, you might be made an offer. This might be from the college that you applied to or were allocated to via an open application, or there is a chance that you could get an offer from a different college as a result of your application being pooled. Pooling is just sort of a bit of a reallocation system where if one college had lots of really strong candidates that they thought all deserved a place for one subject, but they didn't have enough space for all of them, they might offer them out to some other colleges. About 1/5 of applicants, of successful applicants are pooled. Being pooled definitely doesn't mean that you are a worse candidate than someone who got into the original college that they applied to. It just means that the initial college that you applied to didn't have enough space for all of the really great applicants. So really don't worry about that. I would also just add that everyone who gets pooled to a different college ends up loving the college that they go to. I got pooled personally and I loved the college I ended up at. So it's really not something to worry about. Your offer will probably be a conditional offer. It will probably be conditional on you achieving some grade requirements. The only way that you would get an unconditional offer is if you've already sat your exams and you're applying post-qualification. Obviously, you might also be unsuccessful. Firstly, I would just say never be deterred from applying by the prospect of not being successful. Obviously, we can only offer places to those who apply. In addition to that, I think you do learn a lot about your subject just from the process of applying, for prepping for interviews, writing your personal statement, doing all that super curricular activity, and really, really pushing yourself to know more about your subject. And I think that can really benefit you in your A-levels anyway. So I would say there are lots of benefits to applying, even if you don't come out with an offer in the end. If you're unsuccessful, there might also be a chance that you qualify for adjustment. This is for applicants who meet 3 or more widening participation flags, all of the details of which are on the university website. Adjustment takes place in August on results day. If you exceeded your offer for your firm choice and exceed the typical Cambridge entry requirement, you might be made an offer. Anyone who qualifies for adjustment would be informed of that, and the university does keep in touch throughout the adjustment process. So again, it's not something to worry about, it's just something to be aware that it might happen. So what are we looking for? Firstly, academic ability, and this word's in bold because it's really important, potential. We're looking for people who have the potential to do well at Cambridge. So obviously people who satisfy any subject requirements in terms of what A-levels you're taking and what grades you're getting. Genuine subject interest, so motivation and enthusiasm. A good fit between the applicant and the course, so obviously people who are really interested in a lot of the elements of the course, not just one element, which is going back to sort of why choosing the course is one of the most important parts of the application. And then vocational commitment where appropriate. We're also looking for people who are suitable for the Cambridge teaching and learning system, that kind of discursive supervision style. We're looking for people who will do well in the university mode of assessment, the written examinations, and this just interactive discursive environment. We're looking for people with the commitment, determination and drive. Cambridge has quite short terms, so it is quite intense. So we're looking for people with the commitment and determination to keep up with that pace of work. If you are ambitious and motivated, able to deal with competition, disappointment, take risks, meet challenges, study independently and think for yourself, then you might be the perfect Cambridge student.
So how do we assess applications? So we assess applications holistically, so we look at all of these different elements together before we make a final decision. So we'll look at your academic record, so that means any exams that you've sat, including your GCSEs. Some people worry that if they don't have a perfect GCSE record that they won't be considered, but you definitely don't need to have a perfect a set of GCSEs in order to be a strong candidate. What we'd be generally looking for is a strong performance in the most relevant subjects. So obviously it's great if you can do really well in lots of subjects, but don't be put off applying if you're not completely happy with a couple of your GCSEs. We'll also look at your predicted grades, so your predicted grades for your A-level as well. We'll look at your personal statement. So again, sort of we'd be looking to see if you've sort of followed some of the tips that Guy gave earlier and are really sort of discussing your interests, your academic interests, and what you enjoy about the course. We'll look at your school college reference, any written work that you might have submitted, performance in any written assessment, and this will be all looked at sort of alongside contextual data. Contextual data is not anything to worry about. If you'd like to know more about it, you can find out more on the university website. But essentially it just allows us to have a better idea of the applicant and ensure fairness. It's never used to anyone's disadvantage. It's only ever used to an applicant's advantage, but it sort of can help us when we're assessing these applications. And also the interview. So if you are interviewed, we will be able to look at your performance at interview. None of these sort of aspects of the application are more important than others. We do consider them all and they're all important. But because we look at so many different things, it means that not every element needs to be completely perfect. And indeed, there isn't sort of a perfect application as such. So don't sort of worry about every single part of that being absolutely amazing, because we're looking at it all together so that we can assess applicants as fairly as possible. So finally, in terms of finding out more, take a look at the undergraduate prospectus. So you can get a free copy of that online. There's a PDF copy where you can have a look at the different colleges, courses, and find out sort of the key information that you need to know about studying at Cambridge. The undergraduate study website has got, again, everything you need to know about courses, applying, colleges, information about finance, as well as the latest information. So it's definitely worth sort of checking out the website to see if there's anything important that you might have missed. You can contact the Cambridge Admissions Office or College Admissions Office, so you can find out those email addresses or contact details quite easily online. That's if you've got specific questions that you really need answered. So as we've said, for the most up-to-date information and advice about the things we've covered in this presentation, as well as anything else that you might be concerned about, then head to the undergraduate study website, which has literally everything you need to sort of understand how to apply to Cambridge. So thank you very much for listening. We hope you found that helpful.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.